Almost everyone at some point asks the same question: how do I actually become wealthy? Not just earn money or get a better salary, but build something that lasts, something that keeps working even when you don't. Most people instinctively think the answer is hard work. Work more, push harder, stay busy, and eventually it will pay off. But if that were true, the hardest working people would be the richest. And we both know that's not how it works. So what's missing? According to Naval Ravikant, wealth isn't about working harder. It's about understanding how the system really works and playing a completely different game. In this video, we're going to break down some of his most important ideas, not as motivation, but as a way to rethink how money, work, and freedom actually connect. Part 1. Wealth versus money. The first idea sounds simple, but it changes everything once you really understand it. Money is not the same thing as wealth. Money is just a tool, something you use, spend, and exchange. Wealth, on the other hand, is what creates money for you. It can be a business, investments, software, content, or anything that keeps generating value over time. A good way to see the difference is to ask yourself a simple question. If you stopped working today, would money still come in? If the answer is no, then what you have is income, not wealth. This is where most people get stuck. They focus on earning more instead of building something that earns for them. They chase higher salaries, promotions, and better jobs, but salaries don't really scale. Ownership does. Part 2. The time trap. Most people live by a simple rule. Time equals money. The more hours you work, the more you earn. On the surface, that feels fair and logical. But there's a problem hidden inside that equation. Time is limited. No matter how talented or disciplined you are, you still only have 24 hours in a day. You can't multiply them. So if your income depends entirely on your time, there's always going to be a ceiling. Naval puts it very directly. If you're getting paid for your time, you're not going to become truly wealthy. Not because it's impossible, but because the system itself is limited. You're trading something finite, your time and energy, for something that resets every month. Part 3. Leverage. So if time is limited, how do people actually build wealth? The answer is leverage. Leverage is anything that allows you to create more output without increasing the amount of time you put in. Naval often talks about 3 types of leverage that exist today. The first one is code. Software can run 24/7, serve millions of users, and scale almost without limits. The second is media. Things like videos, writing, or content. You create it once, but it can reach thousands or even millions of people over time. The third is capital. Money that's invested into assets can grow on its own without your constant involvement. Once you understand this, the goal shifts. You stop focusing on working more and start thinking about how to build something that works for you. Part 4. Specific knowledge. Another important idea Naval talks about is something he calls specific knowledge. Not all skills are equal. Some can be easily replaced, taught, or automated. Others are much harder to replicate. Specific knowledge is the kind that comes from your natural interests, your strengths, and the things you're genuinely curious about. It's not necessarily what you studied in school. It's what you keep coming back to without being forced. Most people ignore this and follow more traditional, safer paths: degrees, stable jobs, predictable careers. But real leverage usually starts where your unique abilities meet something valuable. When you combine that kind of knowledge with leverage, you become much harder to replace, and that's where serious opportunities start to appear. Part 5. Long-term thinking. Naval often repeats one idea that sounds simple but is incredibly powerful. Play long-term games with long-term people. Wealth doesn't happen quickly. It builds over time, almost invisibly at first, and then suddenly it becomes very obvious. The problem is that most people don't stay in the game long enough to see that effect. They switch directions too often, chase quick wins, or give up when results don't come fast enough. Every time they restart, they lose the progress they could have been compounding. People who succeed tend to do the opposite. They stay focused, keep building, and give their efforts enough time to grow. Part 6. Accountability. There's also a part that many people try to avoid: accountability. If you want bigger rewards, you usually have to take on more responsibility. Your name becomes attached to what you do, and you have to stand behind your decisions. Employees often try to minimize this. They prefer clear roles and predictable outcomes, but ownership comes with visibility and risk, and that's exactly why it creates opportunity. When you take responsibility for results, you also gain more control over them, and that's where real leverage begins. Part 7. You don't need permission. One of the most interesting shifts in today's world is that you no longer need permission to start building something. In the past, you had to go through gatekeepers to create, publish, or reach people. Today, you can start a channel, write online, build a product, or share your ideas without asking anyone. And yet, most people still wait. They wait until they feel ready, confident, or approved. But the people who move forward usually don't wait for that moment. They start earlier, while things are still unclear and imperfect. Part 8. Create, don't just consume. It's also easy to fall into the habit of constantly consuming. Reading, watching, learning, all of it feels productive, and in many ways it is. But on its own, it doesn't create value. At some point, the direction has to shift from consuming to creating. It doesn't have to be perfect or polished. It just has to exist outside your head. Because that's where things start to change, when ideas turn into something real. Conclusion. Naval's ideas aren't complicated, but they can feel uncomfortable because they challenge how most people are used to thinking. They require a shift, away from trading time for money and toward building things that can grow on their own. From focusing on income to thinking about ownership. From endless planning to actual creation. Wealth doesn't come from simply working more hours. It comes from building systems that continue to produce value over time. And once you start seeing things this way, your focus changes. You stop chasing money directly, and instead, you begin creating things that generate it. Naval's ideas aren't complicated, but they can feel uncomfortable because they challenge how most people are used to thinking. They require a shift, away from trading time for money and toward building things that can grow on their own. From focusing on income to thinking about ownership. From endless planning to actual creation. Wealth doesn't come from simply working more hours. It comes from building systems that continue to produce value over time. And once you start seeing things this way, your focus changes. You stop chasing money directly, and instead, you begin creating things that generate it. Even when people understand these ideas, actually applying them is a completely different story. On a logical level, it all makes sense. You build assets, you think long-term, and you look for ways to separate your income from your time. But in reality, most people continue doing exactly what they've always done because the environment they live in constantly pulls them in the opposite direction. The system most people operate in is designed to reward short-term behavior. You show up, you complete tasks, you get paid, and that creates a sense of stability. It feels like progress, even when nothing meaningful is really changing. Over time, that pattern becomes so familiar that it stops being questioned altogether. The difficulty begins when you try to step outside of that system. Unlike a salary, where the connection between effort and reward is immediate, building something of your own requires patience. You invest time and energy without seeing instant results, and for a while it's unclear whether anything is actually working. That uncertainty is where most people stop, not because they lack discipline, but because they're not used to operating without feedback. Comfort also plays a much bigger role than most people realize. When your life is predictable and your income is stable, even if it's not ideal, it becomes very easy to stay in that position simply because it's familiar. You know what to expect, you know how things work, and stepping away from that feels like losing control. At the same time, that comfort quietly sets limits. Growth usually requires some level of uncertainty, and that means doing things that don't feel natural at first. Most people avoid that phase, even though it's exactly where the shift begins. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment or trying to make a massive change all at once, a more realistic approach is to start small. That could be anything that allows you to create value outside your primary source of income. A small project, a skill you begin to develop, or something you build on the side, not because it guarantees money immediately, but because it changes the direction you're moving in.